watching Shalom TV, celebrating Jewish culture. Funding for Shalom TV has been provided by the following. And by viewers like you.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub. Welcome to our retrospective of the year 2011 from a Jewish perspective, as we look back at what was a year of many significant moments. And I'm most pleased to be joined by four wonderful observers of the Jewish scene. Brooke Goldstein is the award-winning filmmaker of the terrific documentary, The Making of a Martyr. And she is the director of the Lawfare project, which seeks to protect First Amendment free speech and reporting here in the United States. And Brooke's latest book is aptly entitled Lawfare, The War Against Free Speech. Then I'm happy to welcome back Seth Mandel, who's now the assistant editor of Commentary Magazine and an award-winning journalist for his coverage of the Second Lebanon War and of Iran's nuclear program. And it's also a pleasure to be joined once again by one of this country's leading novelists and essayists, Thane Rosenbaum, whose widely praised works include The Golems of Gotham, Secondhand Smoke, and Elijah Visible. A law professor, Thane also teaches courses in human rights at Fordham Law School, and his forthcoming book is entitled Revenge and Its Rewards. And it's always a pleasure to be joined by one of America's leading political commentators and an expert in terrorism, Islamic fundamentalism, and the Middle East, Micah Halpern. And Micah is also the Israel columnist for America Online, where you find his ongoing commentary called On-Site Insights. And I thank all of you for coming out and spending some time with the Shalom TV audience. I appreciate it very, very much. Micah, I want to begin with you. We look back at 2011. You have done so many pieces on all the events that have occurred during the year. I've got my own list, but I wanted to find out from you and then from all the panelists, if we had to tell our audience what was, from your perspective, the most significant event that occurred in 2011 for the Jewish world, the Jewish community, what would it be?
I would say most probably the speech of Obama to the United Nations.
Fascinating.
I think would be number one. It really put into context a tension that exists. The tension which said, from one part of the Jewish community, which was saying Obama was moving away from Israel, and on the other side, where it clearly shows, just a second, Obama is articulating a very clear support for Israel. And so that sort of tension became a very exciting development for the Jewish world itself. And so it can't be denied, so to speak. It's part of the public record.
That's lovely.
And the backstory behind that is that the Palestinians were actually pushing very hard for General Assembly and Security Council approval for statehood. And the United States said no. And that speech actually echoed Israel's specific point of view, which is very interesting because the United States is in favor of a Palestinian state, but not this way. So that's where the tension emerged. It's very exciting from the educational point of view, but also from the rhetorical point of view, because what it said to one whole element of American Jewry, it said, just a second, the guy's presenting our point of view, but he was the contrary point of view for such a long time. And so that, I think, was the most critical point.
It's important to note that this is an ongoing discussion that the president is having with the country about Israel and with the Jewish community about Israel. And so it's one marker, and you can look at it a number of different ways, whether he was trying to make up lost time and lost space and diffuse some of the tension. But
tension
between himself and the Jewish community, the outspoken members of the Jewish community who were troubled by
other things that he said.
Other things that he has said.
Okay. And to what extent do you feel the speech at the United Nations changed Jewish perception of the president on the matter of Israel?
Zero.
What do you think?
I think the position of this administration is very troubling on many different levels. I think the speech that he gave at the United Nations is just one symptom of a much larger problem. What I think is extremely troubling is right now the State Department is engaging with the Organization of the Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC. It's a 57-member voting bloc at the United Nations. It's taken control over the General Assembly. It's lobbying to exclude the targeting of American and Israeli civilians from the definition of a crime of terrorism. It's lobbying to have defamation of religion declared a crime against humanity. At the United Nations, we have not just the Palestinians lobbying to become a recognized state. We've had the United Nations recognize the Palestinian state by admission of Palestine, a fictional state of Palestine, at UNESCO. And culminating, I think the number one problem that the Jews have faced this year is the lawfare attack, the delegitimization of Israel through the legal system. That is what we call lawfare, the use of the law as a weapon of war. And there are many, many different examples I'm sure we'll get into over the hour. But that, I think, is the number one thing we should be paying attention to, is lawfare aimed not just at Israel, but at the United States, at other democracies, because every target, every ammo, lawfare ammo shot at Israel has shared implications for other democracies.
Brooke, did the speech that Obama gave change Jewish perceptions of the president?
I can only say I hope so. I can only say that Jewish perspective over time is a reflection of the facts on the ground. I hope that people are paying attention to what the Obama administration is doing, not just vis-a-vis Israel, but embracing the Muslim Brotherhood, purging references to Islamist terrorism in counter-training manuals. All this is of great concern for the Jewish community. I certainly hope that they're paying attention to it.
What do you think?
I have to agree with Seth. I don't see how it possibly changes the minds of most American Jews. And it has a lot to do with the Obama administration's approach from the very outset, which was one in which, after 8 years of George Bush, we are going to demonstrate as many conciliatory gestures of goodwill to the Arab Muslim world. We have our speech in Cairo, where he doesn't visit Israel afterward. We have at least 2 or 3 years of good New Year's messages to Iran. Where does that get anybody? Where does it go? I mean, I guess no one's ever asked these fundamental questions, whether the United States has burnished in any way, established a new reputation in the Arab Muslim world. And it has a lot to do with a sense that of an ambivalence. I think that we saw, at least with the Bush administration, a president who really loved Israel. And I think it may be true that what you're seeing is the concept of on the ground. And we could see, let's look at the deeds of the Obama administration. But there's no real sense that the Obama administration loves Israel, that it sees it as something essential, vital. It does see it in a much more relativized way. And I think that's, for many Jewish Americans, their problem with Obama. Because if you look at many of the deeds, he's, I mean, he did come to the rescue. I mean, only in Egypt can you now sack an embassy, right? You sack embassies, things that we now take for granted. Imagine in Iceland if we would just sack an embassy. In Arab Spring, we're so romanticized by it that you can do anything. You can rape Lara Logan with 200 people,
Right.
And even CBS News wouldn't mention it. No one will talk about it because you're not allowed to say anything that in any way takes away the romanticism of Arab Spring. On the other hand, Netanyahu was able to make one call to the White House, and then the White House made its call to the Egyptian military, and it stopped.
That's correct.
So
You're
yes,
talking about an event where the Egyptian people
sacked the
Basically.
Israeli embassy, and again,
and all the Israeli diplomats there had to flee.
yes,
And they were airlifted out of Cairo,
absolutely they
which
were
was one of the key events of 2011.
right, but Netanyahu made one call, and Obama responded. Now,
It was more than one call, actually. They begged, and the defense minister also begged for several hours before. It took the administration quite a long time before they interceded.
Longer than it should have.
Much longer than it should have.
I didn't know this.
And,
It's good to know. I
and
mean,
so
what
it
I'm
took-
saying is that's the ambivalence,
Okay.
the idea that there is, on the one hand, we continue to use the words, unflinching support, right? Unwavering. We love this word. Unwavering, unflinching, America's greatest friend. But this isn't how you actually treat your best friend.
Thane, in general, you're supposed to represent the liberal position
I always
here.
represent the liberal position. But just because I'm liberal,
I've talked to you about this for a long time.
I'm always on the left, but I'm not stupid.
Yes.
I mean, you can be on the left and not be stupid. It's possible. And I'm the best emblematic example of that. That you have to look in a clear-eyed way at what's happening. And to pretend, I mean, I too wonder all the time about the way that we've completely stripped the language of terrorism so that it can't have any connection to the Islamic world, when in fact it doesn't. It's so obvious, demonstrably obvious on its face, but you have to be able to admit, look, we may not like the implications by saying that there's something with Islam. There's something wrong. There's something wrong in Islam. You may not like the implications, but it is what it is, right? We can address the implications, but to pretend that it's not true is intellectually dishonest.
You didn't qualify Islam at all. Do you mean not to qualify Islam?
Look, I'm not...
Because most of the time now you hear the politically correct statement is there's an element within Islam. There's Islamic extremism.
Yeah, this is the other thing. There have been some pieces in the Wall Street Journal that I found actually very compelling on this idea. There's a difference between the moderate Islam and the reformist Islam. Moderate Islam says, this is not Islam. What's happening are these other crazy people. They're extremists, but they're not Islam. Reformist says, oh, no, it's us. It's us. We have to fix it, but it's us. There's something not right here. So I'm actually not making the moderate distinction because I think that there may be some truth. There's something wrong. We can address it. The reformist ones, the courageous ones, are saying, yes, let's take a critical look at this.
All right. I want to broaden the discussion a little bit because what we've begun with is the relationship between the President of the United States and the Jewish community. And 2011 had major moments of conflict. And perhaps the UN speech, which I also thought was a major moment in the year 2011, contrasts with another speech that the President gave. He gave the speech in September at the UN. In May, he gave another speech right after the Hamas-Fatah alliance in May. Again, I think a dramatic event that impacted the Jewish community in 2011. But he then gave the speech in which he said that there should be a two-state solution and the borders should be based on the 67 lines with land swaps, which just erupted in a firestorm of criticism for him, even though, and I'm curious to hear how the four of you agree or disagree with me, what he said is what I believe I have always heard the formula to be. He just said it out loud. Every time I've ever heard anybody talk about the two-state solution, it's in some way, it's accommodations to the 67, which is really the 48, 49 armistice lines, but it's the pre-67 war lines, and that there will be land swaps because we now know portions of the land around Jerusalem are going to be kept by the State of Israel. There will be some security concerns that have to be adjusted in the borders, and that there's a sort of understanding that the State of Israel will cede to the new Palestinian state, if and when there ever is a two-state solution, land that will compensate. So I didn't feel that Obama said anything I haven't heard for years, but he was roundly criticized. He then went to AIPAC a few days later, said it again, although everybody was much happier with his articulation then. And that was one speech which made many Jews uncomfortable with him. Then you're talking about the speech at the UN where he was only positive about Israel. And for the first time it wasn't, we love Israel, but by the way, and then a whole litany of Palestinian demands would be articulated by the president. So I want to know from all four of you, and again, I'll come back to you, Micah, because you started this. How do you feel in general 2011 went for the relationship between the Jewish community and the President of the United States?
The essence of the President of the United States, and here, once again, you put me in a situation where I'm defending the President of the United States, and I'm an equal opportunity critic. And so what you've done is,
I'm not putting you in any position.
Normally I'm a criticizer, but we've got to see something. It's very interesting. Because we disagree with the President doesn't make him an anti-Semite. I want that to be very clear. And those words are thrown out all the time. I disagree with the President in policy, especially with regard to Israel. But he's not an anti-Semite. That's one. Two is the President has a gestalt. His worldview is that he really wants, and this might be a naivete, but he really wants to even the playing field. And by evening the playing field, and everyone playing on the same level, he hurts the people who were closest to him. friends get hurt most. And when we understand that gestalt, then we'll understand where he's coming from. Again, I disagree with him, but I have to explain where he's coming from.
Okay. I want you to address the same question, where you feel the Jewish community and Obama went this year. And I also am asking you to do that while we do acknowledge, everybody in Israel acknowledges, that although there's a certain rhetoric to the president that is upsetting, when you look at the actual deeds of the Obama administration, we understand that no aid has been cut, that in fact if anything military aid has been enhanced, and that in many, many ways the state of Israel has benefited from the Obama administrations in ways even beyond the Bush administration. But how do you see it, Brooke, in terms of 2011?
I think that there is maybe an unintentional, but there's certainly a policy of confusion with America's allies, whether it be Israel, whether it be Egypt, which was once, America's ally. We're sending out mixed messages, and the point is made by you saying, well, he said this in one speech and he said something else in another speech. So the issue is not what is the relationship between the Jews and President Obama right now, but is Obama acting in the best interests of the United States, like Micah said, and do we recognize that Israel's interests are in fact the United States' interests and vice versa, and the same is true with all other Western liberal democracies. And if you look at what's going on with him embracing the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, if you look at what's going on in terms of the language in the White House, if you look in particular...
Why do you say he's embraced the Muslim Brotherhood?
Well, look, okay, when we have a policy when there are students in Iran who are dying in the street and they are being murdered by the Khomeini regime, and it's in America's best interest to support that type of real insurgency for freedom, and we remain silent, that's a problem. And yet, when the Obama administration continues to call what is really an Arab winter, an Arab spring, and the Arab Spring consists of the Muslim Brotherhood and other fanatical Islamist organizations taking over by force in other Islamist countries, that is a problem. And I think also it's not just the Obama administration. Let's look at the State Department. How does the State Department itself act towards Israel? There's a case right now before the Supreme Court, Zivotofsky versus Clinton. An American born in Israel,
Yes.
in Jerusalem, wanted to have Israel listed on his passport. Well, it's State Department policy. If you're born in Jerusalem, you can have Palestine listed on your passport, despite the fact that no Palestinian state exists. Okay, which is directly contrary to everything that the Obama administration is saying at the United Nations. You can have the West Bank on your passport, but you cannot have Israel. That is a discriminatory...
Jerusalem, Israel.
Exactly. That is a discriminatory practice against American Jewish citizens. And there is a novel question right now before the Supreme Court, what indeed are the foreign policy powers of any administration? So all of this should be of great concern to the community, and I think just asking the overall question, what is the relationship, it has to be dissected, case by case.
The ambassador of the United States met with the Muslim Brotherhood recently in Egypt. It was very clear, and John Kerry accompanied her. It was a very, very clear, so there's one very clear identification of embracing Muslim Brotherhood, just giving evidence to your point.
Any comment you want to make?
Jews don't seem to feel that the president feels Israel in his heart, that he loves Israel. And this is something that Aaron David Miller wrote an op-ed for CNN recently, where he talked about the break between Israel and the president and the tension. And he said that, first of all, he said, if the president is reelected, buckle your seatbelts, because this is the president who's conscious of being reelected. And so you can imagine things going further in this direction rather than in the other direction in the second term. But what he said was, more importantly, I think, and Aaron David Miller is somebody who is sympathetic to the president's point of view and sympathetic to the peace process in general. And he said that the president is not anti-Israel, but he's not in love with the idea of Israel. Mm-hmm. That's what an old Clinton administration Mideast hand said.
I don't know the extent to which it's true. I understand that he said it, and in some way I'm a little uncomfortable only for our audience because of the four of you, no one at the moment wants to champion him, and there are Jews in the Jewish community who would radically disagree, and who feel that he has been really been misunderstood, and that what he has done for Israel has been extraordinary, and that he deserves as much Jewish support going forward as he had in the first election. One of the events that was related to this, by the way, was Netanyahu's addressing the joint houses of Congress right after the president had done the two-state solution with 67 borders and land swaps. And I wondered if any of you found that to be not necessarily the most important moment, but it relates to what we're discussing. And to what extent, Thane, did that moment seem to you to be one of the major moments of 2011?
Well, let me be, I'm on the left again. I do think that it's not that President Obama's been misunderstood. I think Seth's right again. He's been understood. I think the Jewish community gets the concept, which is you don't say the things that you're not showing us the same kind of love. President Obama doesn't say, to me, the thing that every president should start off by saying. But you do hear this in the Republican debates. There's one democratic country in the Middle East. There's one country in the Middle East where there's women's rights, gay rights, where there's a rule of law, there's a liberal press, there's human rights. It's one country. And so therefore, they're our brothers. They come from our world. They have Western values, right? That we don't hear. We don't hear that. We have a relativism. All countries are the same, where please don't think we don't love you. We love all of you equally. And we shouldn't love all countries equally. We should be sending messages. We believe in freedom. We believe in human rights. We believe in the rule of law. We don't believe in stonings, beheadings, lashings. We just don't believe in it. And I think that that's what I think many people in the Jewish community have no longer seen. Now,
I could easily be drawn into
but
this.
I will say, but I will say that I think if you look at deeds, I think he's been great.
Right.
I do think that this is where my liberal impulses are. If you just forget the rhetoric and forget the perception, Seth's going to say, you can't forget the perception. I agree with him. But if you did, right, because I think that that's what the administration is saying, stop what we're saying. Stop pointing to who we're hugging and not hugging. Just look at the aid. Just look at what we do. Just look at you can rely on us when you need us. And I think that's what they're ultimately saying. Netanyahu in front of Congress is a direct manifestation of that because you have congressmen who know that the president's on the ropes in the Jewish community. He knows that the perception...
Was it a mistake for Netanyahu to go to the Congress?
No, I think that he's invited to Congress. There's a lot of support.
Did he humiliate the president by going?
Look, this is the other thing we keep hearing about, but Netanyahu, I just did an event with Debbie Wasserman Schultz at the 92nd Street Y, and she wanted everyone to know that what now is the infamous keeping Netanyahu out in the hallway, waiting as if he was a Domino's pizza boy, right, didn't happen.
Did not happen.
Right. She wanted us to. I don't know. I wasn't there. Right. But I know that idea, the perception that the president went upstairs, he had dinner,
right.
He came down. There was no photo op.
Right.
She was very clear. That simply didn't happen. But that's the perception. And so now there's that insult. So there's a lot of insults, But on the other hand,
was it thrilling for you to watch Netanyahu at Congress?
I'm not surprised.
Were you thrilled? Was it exciting for you?
Well, it's exciting when the Prime Minister of Israel stands before Congress and gets so many applauses.
Yes.
That was exciting.
Yes.
The content was not. It was exciting that Jews and non-Jews were united in America for Israel. That excited me.
The dramatic thing.
Right. But the content, again, was not. It was a media event, and it was staged beautifully, and this was really Netanyahu at his best.
Did Netanyahu insult the president by doing it?
Well, I would say the president conveniently was not in the country during his speech for
But
that
you know
very
what I
reason.
mean.
Yes, no, but I want you to know that handlers understand this very well. So they literally made it in such a time where he was not going to be in the country at the moment. Now, did he insult it? No. He could have upstaged him. Not just because of his gifts of oratory, but because he could have upstaged him because the message was so dramatically contrary to the message coming out of Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House. That could have been tension.
From the Congress.
Yeah, from the
Yes.
Congress. And I've got to tell you, Netanyahu made a mistake at the beginning of the Obama administration because he actually thought he could come to Congress and wrestle it away from the President of the United States and failed because long-term Democrats are going. He failed because he thought he also has remarkable charisma, personal charisma.
Benjamin,
And-
yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
And so that he would be able to literally wrestle these.
It's hard for me to believe he thought that could happen.
There is an unbelievable amount of arrogance that politicians have. If you do not believe that, I will introduce you to numerous ones.
All right, I trust you. How did you feel about the speech?
I love every time Netanyahu talks. I think he's a great orator. I have a crush on him. I love him. But look, we're talking about, look at Obama's
not his
acts.
type,
Look
by
at
the
the
way.
administration's acts. Excuse me, and we were talking as an example, look at all the foreign aid that's going to Israel. Well, who has the power of the purse in this country? It's Congress. And Congress is the #1 greatest ally of Israel. And I think we should all thank God that that's true.
For you, what did Netanyahu at the Congress mean to you?
I'll tell you this. He did the president a favor. You asked if he humiliated the president. He did the president a favor.
Because?
The Israeli prime minister's responsibility when there's tension between the executive branch and the prime minister's office is not to further feed into that tension. It's not to hide, it's not to run away, and it's not to pout. What he did was he showed up and he illustrated our countries love each other. Look at the standing ovations. And he started off and he said, "Congratulations, Mr. President, you got bin Laden." He recognized, he said, look, the president has done great things for the security of America, for the security of Israel, for the security of the world. And there were even, he was even subject to some remix video teasing because of how much he repeats how much we love America. Israel has always been pro-American. Israel will always be pro-American. That's what he said, and he emphasizes it. And the standing ovations, he turns around to Joe Biden, the vice president. He says, "Remember when? Remember, Joe? Remember we were gallivanting around town? Remember those days?" The relationship between the two countries is long, it's strong, it's generally very happy and an exciting relationship for people in both countries because they understand each other and they see many things the same ways. And Bibi illustrated exactly just how strong and how deep the ties run.
Was it in any way a high point of the year for the Jewish people?
In this country?
Yes.
I don't think so, because I think people were happy about it and I think they were excited about it and I think it was a lot of fun. But
for you, Seth, what was the most important Jewish event of 2011?
I think it's an ongoing event, if I can say that without copping out, which would be the election process. I would say that the
election process here in the United States?
Yes. And that's because every issue between and among the Jewish community is aired out at full volume because of how loud the process has become and how ubiquitous the process has become.
For you, what was the most important Jewish event of 2011?
I have two that no one here is going to approve of at all, but it might make it interesting for the next 10, 15.
Will it be on my list?
No. No, but I have two, and it all dawned on me while we're talking. It shows you how you inspired. One was Occupy Wall Street. What is it like to live
Was it a Jewish event?
Yes.
Was a Jewish event?
I'll tell you why. It's a Jewish event that, with the exception of very few people, there was very little "let's blame Jewish bankers." What is it like to live in a
I think the
country?
whole thing was in the context of that.
Well,
Not
I mean,
1%
I
was
felt that when
Well, there's
you
a
can
difference of opinion.
Yeah, although there
It was
were
on my list also. By the
yeah,
way.
but
For
no,
the
I
opposite- for
actually
the opposite
thought,
reason.
imagine living for Jews to live in a country in which this was hardly a pogrom. This was hardly the democratic process worked. Yes, there were people who had this view. By the way, in the Tea Party, they eliminated that immediately. The Tea Party had more control over anti-Semitism. Yes, there was anti-Semitism within Occupy Wall Street, but I'm thinking about other times in history where nations go through economic collapse and the impulse to blame Jewish bankers.
Okay,
And
very
although it existed,
But
it looked
it was a minor theme.
Exactly. It seemed to me so easily dissipated and was hardly the pivotal
Okay.
way to describe it.
You're right. It's not on my list.
Yeah.
What's number two?
What Gingrich said last week about the invented people. And I'll tell you why, invented Palestinian people. And obviously,
we should make sure everybody understands. At one of the in an interview, which was then cited in the Republican debate about 2 weeks ago, from when people are seeing this, Gingrich said that from his perspective, the Palestinian people are an invented people,
Right.
and that the administration is not honest enough to say the truth about history, and he was criticized for it on stage by virtually every other
Right.
Republican candidate.
Well, see, this is look, here, I'm going to show you.
Wait, is he right?
My leftist credentials. Look, it's ridiculous, right? What he said is ridiculous.
Is it ridiculous?
I know you wouldn't agree with it. It's ridiculous. It's inflammatory. It's intentionally designed to create conflict, okay? But what it does do, which has stopped for many years, is people are afraid to ask the critical question, what happened in 1948?
Right.
It forced now, will it actually push the debate? I was hoping, okay, now you got something. What you're saying is ridiculous from my point of view, but it's not like Israel was invented in 1967 with the Six-Day War. It's not like they were invented in 1982 with the invasion of Lebanon. If you speak to most Americans, they don't have a clue about anything, but certainly, I mean, about anything, but certainly if you ask, is Israel to them is a superpower that beats up on Arabs? This is the punchline. This is your soundbite. And I'm thinking, how did that happen? How did that happen in 60 years?
Through an orchestrated
Right.
PR campaign.
Okay, but I'm saying, how did that happen? That what started out from the Holocaust to 1948 is not part of the narrative, and somehow a line got drawn when Israel became a bully. And I thought, if Gingrich, if he did anything here, hopefully what he's really asking is, can we go back to the scene? What actually happened? Where did these people, where were they before? How did they become countries? What countries were created? And again, I haven't been happy in the last week or so because it hasn't really, it hasn't inspired.
It did not spark
Right.
the conversation you wanted.
I thought it was a great
By the way,
moment.
I thought it was a moment also. Because there are so many moments, and part of this is to touch on things, do you have an event?
Yes, I do.
What's your event?
I think you'll
Brooke?
be happy, like on point with this one. Okay, and actually, I have to plug it. We wrote about this significant event in December's
Commentary?
issue of Commentary magazine, and Seth was kind
Okay.
enough to accept my submission to edit it. A very significant event, and I think it was a 2010 and rolling into 2011 event, are the Flotillas. Why? Because for us, they represent a paradigm shift. You know, usually anti-Israel activism is about speaking and PR campaigns. I argue in this article that anti-Israel activism has now crossed the line into providing material support, unlawful material support directly to designated terrorist groups like Hamas that kill innocent men, women, children.
One of the events of this year was the Hamas-Fatah alliance.
Mm-hmm.
I believe there's a law in the United States that we are not supposed to fund groups which are on the terrorist list. And there has been some discussion of the fact that the United States administration should defund the Palestinian Authority so long as they are in a unity alliance with Fatah.
I agree.
I'm sorry, with Hamas.
I agree, and I think
It didn't happen. Why do you think it didn't happen?
Well, because
Is it politically
because this is
impossible?
only one of the most overt ways that we help, that we provide material support to Hamas. First and foremost, we are supporting UNRWA, the United Nations Relief Works Agency. We're something like 90% of the budget. UNRWA has completely redefined, the term refugee in international law. So generations after generations after generations of Palestinian people are now considered refugees. But besides that, UNRWA hires straight off the Hamas payroll. UNRWA teaches from PA and Hamas textbooks in its schools that teach innocent Palestinian children to kill themselves as suicide bombers. Okay,
Should the United States defund
we are
UNRWA?
aiding and abetting Hamas by funding UNRWA. 100% we should follow in Canada's example. Canada, under Stephen Harper, a remarkable man, has defunded UNRWA for this exact reason. And yes, we should cut all financial ties with the terrorist organization. Otherwise, we could be accused of aiding and abetting the murder of Palestinian people.
We have to get the facts right here. I'm really sorry. There is still yet to be a finalized agreement between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas.
You don't think there is a unity agreement?
They're still working it out.
So when people
They're
say
still
there
working it
is a unity
then
agreement,
they're wrong. I'm
they're
sorry.
wrong.
There's no sharing yet. They have not switched over policy. There's still a prime minister who was appointed and not elected, and there's a reason for that, because they disagree with so much. Now, I'm not saying that there were two laws on the books of Congress, by the way, that prevent the United States from aiding in any way, shape, or form the terrorist organization. So I want to be clear. They're moving in that direction, but I don't think that they will ever get to the point
So
of
they
agreement.
should not be criticized at this point for not defunding or for their
Right,
continued
there are
funding
reasons not
of
to
Palestinian
fund.
Authority.
There are reasons not to fund, but not
Okay.
this one right now. The agreement is not in place.
Okay, but I find what the events you bring to be fascinating and important. I want to now read a list. Okay? And I want from the four of you, very important, only a little important, not important at all. Fair enough? And I will tell you also, from me, I believe years and years and years from now, when people look back at 2011, what they will remember about the year 2011 Jewishly is Gilad Shalit coming home. And I believe of any event that will characterize this year, Gilad Shalit's return is the number one event. Are you comfortable with that or uncomfortable?
I think it's an extremely important event, and it's a positive event. So I'd like to agree with you that let's make the most important event a positive one.
Okay,
Return
what do you
of
think?
Gilad.
How important is that?
It's very important. It's very important because it unites Israel and the diaspora. It unites global Judaism in one cause. People pray together. They say the same prayers at the same times for him. When I was in Israel in the spring, and I was there when one morning the entire country stopped speaking about and stopped what they were doing for 5 minutes and spoke only about Gilad Shalit for 5 minutes to signify the 5 years that he had been in captivity.
One of the issues that the return did raise was, did Israel do the right thing to trade more than 1,000 Palestinian terrorists, some of whom had done heinous things, for one Israeli? And there was a lot of ambivalence within the Israeli scene. What was your comment about the return of Gilad Shalit?
It was on my list, but down at the bottom. It was 10. And the reason why it was important, but it was not significant because I was against the exchange.
Okay, so you thought it
and
was a
I was
mistake.
against the exchange. And I'm glad that I was not the advisor to the Prime Minister on that level. I think it's important to recognize the damage that could be done as a result of it. And by the way, this is not a personal issue. This is not an issue. This is a principal question. I was against it, and I still stand against it, by the way. And we're seeing right now, I just saw the list of the next stage of Palestinian prisoners that are being released. And it is scary.
Okay. Gilad Shalit's coming home.
Look, I'm a parent, and I don't live in Israel, so I feel unqualified to speak to this issue. But I will say, as a law professor, there were 1,000 people with blood on their hand. And there are families in Israel who lost loved ones for these 1,000 people who were not properly punished. And that's the part that's being lost here. Obviously, I want the family to rejoice in the return of their son, but the moral universe is in complete peril when 1,000 people who are guilty of crimes have now been released to commit again and not to be deservedly punished.
Okay.
And that
We do agree it's a lovely event, the ambivalence and the problems notwithstanding. And you said, yes, it's positive. I want to give a negative one that I also believe will be seared in the Jewish memory. And that was the massacre of the Fogle family in Itamar in March. And that seems to me to be also an event that really characterized some of the problems you're highlighting, but it characterized and will forever be a part of 2011. What is your comment?
My comment is that it's in the context of larger massacres. I think that we can't see the context today simply as one event. And terrorism is an ongoing act, and the reality is that even though people want to change, and people in the United States would like certain elements in the world to change, they are dedicated towards destruction of the Jewish people and Israel. And there were people, those constituencies have to be identified. Just in the aftermath of the Gilad Shalit's return, one of the exchanged prisoners, a woman, the day afterwards, entertained a whole slew of school children and said to all of them, girls, I want you all to grow up and be just like me. Try to kill as many Israelis as possible. This is the context. So we've got to understand this. The recidivism rate is huge.
Do you remember the tragedy of the Fogle family in Itamar?
Yes, I was there. I was in Israel right around that time. Yeah.
A major event of 2011?
It's a major event. Yes.
You're an academic, so there was a closing.
some people don't think so,
No,
but it's all
you're
right.
down. One of the events of 2011 was Yale's decision to close down YISA, Charles Small's YISA, the Yale Initiative for the Study of Anti-Semitism. Comment on it as in terms of what you think the significance is in the year 2011.
Look, Jews are not part of the community of people who receive the benefits of moral relativism and political correctness. Jews are now part of the mainstream. And so even, we see this in many, many different ways. In Westchester County, a Holocaust education center is now directed by a Muslim woman, and the entire program is no longer devoted to Holocaust memory, but human rights issues. Now, I don't know how that happened, but it happened. A university. So I'm saying this is emblematic of a larger question, that we shut down things that were once sacred, and now on the theory that this is just related to Jews and they're part of the mainstream.
Any comment on the significance of that happening to the Jewish community in 2011?
Well, I also just want to stay on the Yale point
Yeah, that's
because,
fine,
but Yale also released a book called Cartoons That Shook the World about the now infamous Muhammad with a bomb in his turban cartoons, and refused to publish the actual cartoon itself. And so this is just symptomatic of this self-censorship within academia.
But that is a little different, Brooke.
How so?
They didn't want the campus to be blown up. They weren't.
Right.
No, but
self-censorship out of fear of violent reprisal.
But I think this is a little different. This is where there's a lack of honesty to say we're absolutely capitulating to people who will just blow us up. We're actually we're okay with that. And the way instead of a university actually saying, look, we're not publishing the cartoons because we don't want to get blown up. It's horrible, but this is horrible. This is horrible. We're not going to do it because we have a beautiful campus. But there wasn't the kind of backlash that you would think to say, for a scholarly community, it's outrageous that we are living in a world that we're all now Salman Rushdie.
I believe almost very few of our audience will know the name Aaron Bisman. Aaron Bisman created J-Dub Records. J-Dub Records was the first Jewish label. Netanyahu became famous through J-Dub Records, and then ultimately, when he became too big, he left J-Dub Records. J-Dub Records was supposed to be emblematic and a sort of a paradigm of what has been called Jewish renewal among young people in the Jewish community. And funders were very enthusiastic about J-Dub for a long time, and many of the rappers that became famous for young Jews all came through J-Dub. J-Dub Records this summer lost its funding and had to close. And there are people on the Jewish scene who feel that the fact that the funding community within the Jewish American community permitted J-Dub to just disappear is symptomatic of a larger issue of, number one, to what extent is there going to be real funding of innovative, revival-oriented Jewish projects? And does it mean in some way that the revival movement was overstated, and that while there are pockets of it, it is 2011 will be remembered as the year in which the revival movement came and then went?
Well,
I would say firstly, Netanyahu was very successful, and some business model was mixed up here. If they were not able to turn that into profit to continue,
No, but he left the label. I mean, I did an event with Netanyahu. Let me just start off by saying,
I'm asking,
when he started really selling records, he moved
I
on
had,
to major label.
in any case, here you have a 30-year-old saying this is the most important event. I thought he was wrong.
Yes.
But I don't want to think it's, I did put it on my list because for an element in the Jewish community, it does say something.
But, I mean, I think it's a fiction to think that Jews support Jewish culture. I mean, it's its own fiction, I mean, the idea that Jews buy books, Jews borrow books, Jews go to libraries. It's not, I'm a fiction writer, so I can tell you, it's just not true. I mean, I look at J-Dub and think, what's the same problem we're having in the broader cultural world, right? We're just publishing fewer Jewish-related books, far fewer Holocaust-related books.
But this is music. This isn't books.
But I'm just saying, I'm speaking as an author. But in music, yeah, J-Dub itself was in fact a phenomenon and should have been supported by the Jewish community. Instead, it was subjected to market forces, and this is what you see.
Exactly.
Okay?
That's my point.
Right.
So your point is
that markets determine where direction goes, and if you give feeder money, you hope that it works. The reality is that we don't always know where the future is in terms of creativity. So we give feeder, but it's not a black hole. It's not a black hole. You give feeder until you realize that something else is out there. Maybe something else is out there.
what does it say to you about an end of this renewal
It's not an end. We're constantly changing. That's the greatness of creativity. Communities are exciting and dynamic. And actually, and leaders and donors have advisors to move them in that direction. And donors, by the way, don't want to give to the same thing all the time. They want new and exciting ideas and projects. But those projects have to also realize that there's an end to the donors sometimes.
Very
they have
fair.
to build up on their own.
But there was but I think that it's not just 2011. I think, to give both my age and, again, my politics, for 6 years I was the literary editor for Tikkun magazine, when Tikkun was actually a hot magazine. And it's not really true anymore, but it was part of what was a wave of Jewish renewal that doesn't really exist. JW is symptomatic of other aspects.
I agree 100%.
I think, look, as someone who runs two not-for-profits, I think obviously philanthropy is affected by market issues, and we've seen that. I mean, I don't have to mention any names here, but somebody went to jail for stealing a lot of money from the Jewish community. But I think it's positive in the sense, number one, because a lot of the people working in the nonprofit world in the Jewish community have viewed it as a zero-sum game, and perhaps it'll force us to work together more often, to work in cooperation with each other, and to form alliances. But then again, I'm looking at things that, for example, the Conference of Presidents is doing under Malcolm Homeline. And so many new ideas are popping up. The Strategic Communications Center is popping up. America's Voices in Israel. We had He magazine a couple years ago, and I'm sure, I'm going to type something in the internet, and we'll have some sort of other Jewish magazine pop up that'll have a lifespan for 6 or 7 years. I mean, this is the nature of the market.
But I also think that there's a virtually unexamined part of this, which people don't really want to because it's kind of stressful, which is, is there a conversation going on between and among the generations on what is important? What is Judaism? What is Jewish education? What does Jewish renewal even mean? What are we renewing? That conversation is something that needs to happen because the young generation and the generation that has been funding these Jewish renewal projects, they don't see eye to eye. And the young generation, there's a lot of mainstreaming of Jewish cultural identity into broad political ideas and infusing them with a sort of Jewish hechsher. And I think that's something that the generations don't agree on. And I'll go back, and I think this is a very important part, and I'm glad Thane brought up Occupy Wall Street, because the part of Occupy Wall Street I think was very important to the Jewish community is this. Young Jews played a very significant role in it, and they did so through organizations like one called Occupy Judaism. And what you don't see, at least in a high-profile way, is Occupy Christianity and Occupy Islam. And you see this as a recurring theme in Jewish culture, which is that there's a young generation that sees an opportunity to change the structure of Judaism, which is to weaken the reliance on authority. Occupy Judaism was an attempt to tear down the authority that has been presiding over what gets passed down between the generations and say, we're taking for ourselves, we're renaming things, we're renewing.
But who did it represent?
Well, it represents thousands of young Jews.
Thousands?
Yes, absolutely. You see this all over the place, and you see
And
it.
thousands all over the country, or in pockets, or what?
Well, the Jewish population is where it is.
Yes,
so
but
you see it more in big cities than in rural areas. But
And
yes,
what I've seen in every major city, there would have been Occupy Judaism movements?
it wasn't in every major city. But the movement itself, first of all, a lot of this goes on in social media. So it's difficult to say, well, there weren't 3,000 Jews that showed up in Oakland, because it doesn't really work that way with this generation anyway. But in general, it's a sense of what is authority. And if you look at, say, there was an article in the Huffington Post about global warming the other day, and the author wrote that, why are we looking at this through the lens of what's good for the Jews? We know the Keystone XL oil pipeline from Canada is good for the Jews because it helps energy security. But so what, she said. So what, it's good for the Jews. Why should that be what the young Jewish generation focuses on?
I want to ask you another question about 2011, and then we'll see what other people have to say. One of the events, very small, and yet for me there was significance to it, was when a group of Orthodox Israeli soldiers walked out of an IDF event because at that event there were women officers singing. And they did this against the orders of their commanders, and they were in an officers training program. And the IDF said, you can't be in the officers program if in the middle of an event, because a woman is singing, you get up and walk out against orders. of all the events, by the way, I may be missing some things, but of all the events that has a Jewish, you should excuse the expression religious, it's not about religious, but in terms of Judaism, I don't know if there were any other major events that I would find in 2011, but that event touches on something within the Jewish community. I wondered what your perspective on it was.
Well, it's part of the issue of Orthodox Judaism and how it relates to the rest of the Jewish world.
Exactly right.
And that's a very difficult relationship right now, honestly. There's a lot of mutual suspicion. And I think that, it's interesting because we talk a lot about having interfaith conferences, and we talk about, when December comes around, we talk about interfaith holiday celebrations, all these interfaith issues, but we have a lot of intra-faith issues, and this is at or near the top.
Especially in the state of Israel.
Sure.
Yeah. Sure. What was your sense?
Less so. I found it less significant.
Okay.
The tensions between religious and non-religious Jews is not new in Israel and will not be new, and will not be resolved. By the way, because
Won't be resolved.
It will not be resolved.
The Messiah will have to come.
Right, because they have two completely different points of view of the world, and that's okay. See, I believe in that kind of conflict.
Except
I
when you
believe
say
that
it's okay.
It's okay to
There's
have
a
those.
practical
Look,
problem there.
I've spoken in officers' training courses. I am also an Israeli, and all those things together gives me a certain insight. I'm also an Orthodox Jew. All those things give me insight into this. I'm telling you that this is not new, and that is not necessarily a problem. It is an issue in terms of rapprochement. That is, the officers have to deal with their superiors, and superiors have to understand their soldiers. That's an internal army issue. This is not, I don't think, illustrative of any change in Israeli culture. If anything, the opposite. It is Israeli culture. There is tremendous tension between religious and non-religious Jews, to the point where literally and truly they have almost nothing to do with one another.
Thomas Friedman just wrote a column as we're sitting together, in which he sort of did a litany of things that bother him about the state of Israel. Some of them I just found so trivial and they annoyed me that he would even write about them. But one of the things he wrote about was how the Egged Bus Company did agree to Orthodox demands in some Orthodox neighborhoods of Israel to create back of the bus seating for women. And in fact, women at certain places are supposed to get on the Egged bus from the back. And he was using this as an example of where both Jewish life and the state of Israel were just going in a direction that made young American liberal Jews uncomfortable with the state of Israel. If Tom were here, what would you say to him?
Well, I would say, what I say often to him is that you're exaggerating and you're poking and finding little tiny elements and blowing them into something that they're not. That is not to say that there aren't buses like this and there aren't lines like this, but many of them are subcontracted buses, which already legally changes the entire situation. It's not a state-sponsored bus, which is different. In other words, what happens is one can have private buses. We have them in New York that run from Muncie to New York, where there are actually buses where women sit on one side and men sit on the other side.
You have synagogues like that.
It happens to be called, some of them are called prayer buses, because they actually conduct in the morning at such an hour praying, and they require that division between men and women. Now, I'm saying he's poking on things in order, and we do it all the time in our arguments. We take an argument, we find one element, we balloon it, and create the foundation of our argument based on that. And this is truly, I think, one of the elements that he did, and it's wrong. It's dishonest intellectually, which I think we have to be all the time, and it's a pet peeve of his, which is another issue.
Would you permit yourself to hear a woman singing?
Yes.
You're an Orthodox Jew. Would you permit a woman to sing in your presence? Yes. So one of the things I think American Jewry has to understand, and what Tom Friedman has to understand, is there is a spectrum even of Orthodox Jewry. And within given communities, no matter where, Jews have a right to work it out. I have one more.
I just want to comment
Sure.
really quickly. I think what's shocking is not the fact that some IDF soldiers walked out, but the fact that Secretary of State Hillary Clinton used the example to say that Israel now reminds her of Iran.
Yes.
And that is wrong on so many
I'm
levels.
so glad
I
you
mean,
said that, Brooke.
where do I begin? The fact that soldiers were reprimanded, the fact that it's not the policy of Israel, the fact that this is an exercise of free speech. I mean, wouldn't Israel be more like Iran if it prevented them from exercising their right to free speech? I mean, it's problematic.
Did you see that comment, by the way? Did it bother you?
It bothered me on so many levels. It's unbelievable.
Yes.
But also, I've got to say, it was at the Saban Center, and it was a private discussion, which I think is important also. That being said, it just shows how little the administration understands the inner workings of the Jewish world and in Israel itself. That was more illustrative even than the comment itself, but it showed just how little she understood what was going on there. She should have been criticized, and it was a shame because this is actually has become almost, I'm going to call it a policy. We're seeing a direction of attacking Israel's credentials as a democracy coming out of Washington, and that troubles me because if it's anything, it is a tremendous experiment and laboratory in democracy. It's a laboratory in democracy, and that's exciting, and that's what we're missing.
Israel isn't America and doesn't have
Of course
to
not.
be
That's my
America.
point. Yes.
And the arguments are contradictory. I mean, they're criticizing Israel for being a pluralistic society, and they're saying, well, people can be orthodox, and they, we can argue against it. But at the same time, they're making the opposite, argument.
But also, I'll inject a quick bipartisan note, which is that Condoleezza Rice compared it to segregation growing up in the South. And so there's a sort of bipartisan Secretary of State foolishness that this is American renewal, and this is what we pass down through the State Department from generation to generation.
This is worth a discussion in and of itself. We have to wrap up. I could talk to you all day long. This is the first time I've had a chance to talk to you. You are so welcome. Please come often, will you?
I would love to.
I would really
Thank
love
you.
it. Seth, it's wonderful to have you back. Come again. Good luck at commentary.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
Love you so much,
Love you,
Thane.
my friend.
Always. You got to come as much as you
I
possibly
cannot.
can.
I want to
And
say this
wish
on
you-
television. I can't say no to the rabbi.
And I want both
Guilt.
books that you're doing.
Okay.
They are, again, name them.
There's a young adult novel, The Stranger Within Sarah Stein, which comes out in March, and then next year a book called Revenge and Its Rewards, which is a nonfiction.
Good luck, Bo. And Micah, I love you tremendously, and you bring a degree of sophistication and experience that is wonderful that you share with our audience. Kol tuva hatzlacha to all of you. Come often, come often, come often. I am most grateful to all of you. And that's our retrospective of 2011. We hope you enjoyed hearing the thoughts of Brooke Goldstein, Micah Halpern, Seth Mandel, and Thane Rosenbaum. So, what do you think? What do you think were the most important events of 2011 from a Jewish perspective? Do you think our panelists missed any crucial event? Please, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please write me, email me, post on our Facebook wall, or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub, wishing all of you the healthiest and happiest of years as we begin 2012 together. L'chaim, my friends, to life.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who can send a tax-deductible contribution of $36 or more to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media to help support our programming. Tax-deductible checks may be made out to GEM and mailed to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. Please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD, and we thank you for your kind support.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish Education in Media.